I am Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. With us back once again, a guy I haven't had on in a while. His name is Jeff Berwick. Now, Jeff Berwick is the editor of the Dollar Vigilante. You can find that at dollarvigilante.com. Great site. Been going there for a long time. Deep site. Mr. Berwick is also the CEO of TDV Media Services. He helps people move their wealth around internationally and provides solutions for, wealth movement internationally. You also, are very vocal about the end of the civilization or end of the financial. Jeff Berwick, I want to talk about that first off. Jeff Berwick, thank you for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Greg.
Well, I just want to start the basis of everything you do is your basic premise, with Dollar Vigilante and in life, the way you think about the economy, which a lot of people agree with you, and that you are forecasting the end of the monetary system as we know it. I mean, just that simple, that at some certain point, things are going to change. Where are we in the unwinding of the monetary system as we know it? I know it's a process and not a single event. Where do you think we are?
Well, I think it started to collapse in 1913, right, when they started the Federal Reserve. And obviously been lots of ups and downs. The federal government in the U.S. went bankrupt for all technical ways of looking at things in 1933 when they devalued the dollar against gold and confiscated gold from Americans. And then things went sort of bumpily along through World War II. And then by 1971, it was bankrupt again, and they were at risk of losing all their gold, so they took the dollar off the gold standard. So this system has been in collapse for a long time, but it takes quite a while. But now we're in the very end stages of this system, in my opinion, because of the amount of U.S. government debt. The debt is going up now over $1 trillion a year, and that's not even doing it properly. If they actually accounted for it properly under cash accounting, it'd be over $5 trillion a year it's going up. But even if you just take that $17 trillion, if they allowed interest rates just to rise to a fairly normal average rate over time of, say, 10%, that would be $1.7 trillion worth of interest payments alone, which is almost the entire tax base of the U.S. So they can't actually allow the interest rates to rise now, and that's why we're at the zero interest rate policy until the system collapses, in my opinion. Because if they do allow it to interest rates to rise, it will effectively make the U.S. government completely bankrupt and insolvent, and it will be a complete collapse of the U.S. government. They'd have to actually wind it back by 80 or 90%, which I think would be great, and I actually think 100% would be perfect. But we're really nearing the end of this system. That's why you're seeing all these crazy things happening over the last few years.
Well, I know you're an anarchist and a libertarian, and when I say the word anarchist, people think, oh, no, Molotov cocktail. No, that's not what you say is, you're not into violence, correct?
Absolutely.
What you're into is just a lot less government. That's why you say dialing it back 80 or 90% would be good. Well, Dave, I just had David Stockman on, the former White House budget director, and you've just mentioned, if rates would go to 10%, he'd think it'd be a disaster if rates went to, 5% on the 10-year Treasury. He thinks that there would be severe, destruction of assets. He's calling for deflation. All basically real estate and stocks and bonds and things like that. But he does like gold. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But I want to get to more about this collapse. What's the collapse going to look like? You're saying the end of the financial system as we know it. I mean, you even have an acronym for that. What does it look like to people here in America when the financial system does end as we know it?
Well, I think no one really knows. We've never had the currency like the U.S. dollar collapse, and that's what I'm predicting over the next few years, and definitely within 5 to 10 years, and probably sooner, but you never know. These things, we're in totally uncharted territory right now. We have the entire world on a completely fiat system. We have governments around the world printing money, or central banks printing money, and governments going into massive amounts of debt. This is not going to end well, and but how it actually looks, we really don't know. But I really would suggest to people to start preparing now, because already the U.S. is starting to bring in capital controls. They're doing it very sneakily through something called FATCA, the Foreign Accounts Act, which basically is going to mean that it's going to be almost impossible for Americans to move their money outside of the U.S., and that comes into effect in July 2014. So the doors are closing very quickly if you want to get some of your capital outside of the U.S., and you're starting to see the U.S. government starting to talk about possibly nationalizing pensions, nationalizing IRAs. These are all things that all governments do near their end stages. They just try to take as much as they can to try to stay alive of their own citizens' wealth. And it's going to be very dangerous times. And to me, to not prepare now is sort of like really waiting until the last minute. It's so close that you really don't want to be waiting and just seeing how it goes. It's really a lot better to be a few years early than a day too late.
I like your thinking there. I mean, when the dollar does go bust, is it going to be worthless? Are they going to have bail-ins? Are they going to, is some cash in hand going to be worth something for a short period of time? What does it look like to you? What does it look like to the guy on the street with dollars? Because a lot of people really do not know what's going on.
No, they don't, and that's what makes this coming collapse so scary. Is most people aren't expecting it, and they're not going to be prepared. And what's going on with the Federal Reserve right now is they're printing so much money that it actually makes it look like the economy is still functioning fairly normally, but it's not at all. So people are spending money like they're expecting everything's going to be good. They keep hearing about green shoots and there's going to be a recovery. That's not going to happen. All they're doing right now is just printing money, and it makes things look like it's going well. Like the U.S. stock exchange, the Dow Jones is at record highs, but in real terms, it's not because they're printing so much money. If you actually look at the Dow Jones in terms of gold, it's down massively over the last 13 years. And if you look at even in terms of the money supply of the U.S., it's down massively. So it's very dangerous times, and people aren't prepared for it. And what exactly happens, I don't know. And I actually recommend that people keep cash in their house, which is oddly enough because I'm expecting a currency collapse. But during this currency collapse, I expect what you just brought up, which is a lot of bail-ins. The U.S. government's already been planning for that. The Federal Reserve just met yesterday talking about bank runs are going to happen, or they're preparing for bank runs. In Europe, in Canada, in Australia, and countries around the world, they've actually legislated bail-in legislation, which means that if the banks get into trouble, which they will, they're all insolvent already, that they can just take their cash of their own clients, which is exactly what happened in Cyprus. And that's going to happen in Italy. It's going to happen in France. Japan's going to be a disaster with their monetary policy right now, where they said they're going to increase their money supply by 50% over the next 2 years, which is almost like legislating hyperinflation. This is going to be an amazing time, and there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff happen. So you really just be prepared. Have precious metals, but don't just have them in your own country, because it's not like unlikely that the governments will start to confiscate gold again. It's totally not out of the range of possibilities. So you want to have those internationalized and really internationalize your life quite a bit, and have assets outside of the country or the government that purports to own you, because they will own you, and they're showing that every single day. And you look at the police state that's rising in the U.S. Police forces are buying tanks and 4.5 billion hollow point bullets. They're preparing for a major societal collapse. It's just obvious, and I think that it will happen, and it's going to be very scary and very dangerous, and people really should be aware of what's going on.
You know, I do notice that, Jeff, you do a lot of mainstream media interviews. I mean, you were just on Fox News talking about Bitcoin, which we'll talk about that in just a second. But I want to get your feeling about what you get when you're on mainstream media. It seems to me, you know, a guy like you were a former big-name company owner. You've made millions of dollars. You live outside the country in Acapulco. You have started a community down in Chile with, libertarian community. You are obviously have some wealth. I don't really want to know how much, but you made a couple of right decisions. And yet when people like you or David Stockman or Peter Schiff or any of these people that are, sounding the trumpet of alarm, they try to make you out like you're some wacko whack job or some nefarious person. What's your read on why is it just me? But because when I see you on TV, I think they're always trying to discredit you in some way, some subtle way. They don't come out and say you're a whack job. They don't say you're nefarious, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's really part of their business model. A lot of their advertisers are all part of this financial system. And when I come on and I say that this financial system is going to collapse, they don't want everyone to really know that yet, because they're still making money in this system. And of course, secondly, it's really their job in the U.S. there especially to create all sorts of arguments and make it all flashy and make it sound like everything's crazy and get everyone yelling. And that's why I really appreciate being on a program like yours, where we can actually just talk like regular people, where it's not just little 30-second 2-second sound bites, and then they whisk me off somewhere. But yeah, it's really sad, and unfortunately, that's where most of the people get their financial and investment information, is from these crazy CNBC and things like that. They're just shouting out at them and promoting whatever the big thing of the day is, without even talking about the really serious issues that are underlying this coming systemic collapse.
Is this why so many people, because I reach probably a couple of percent of the people, although more and more people are waking up. Do you think this is why the mainstream media, or do you think this is why so many people are in the dark, totally in the dark, in denial, that because what they're told is, wow, new highs on the stock market, hey, Janet Yellen says she's going to keep printing money, this is a good thing. Do you think this is why so many people are so in the dark and so not worried? They're playing on the railroad tracks, the train's coming off in the distance, and they're being told, oh, the tracks are warm, they're nice, stay right there, it's good.
Well, I think it starts way back decades ago with government public education. You might have noticed that they never teach anyone in public schools, government indoctrination centers for children, anything about money or banking. They don't want you to know. Actually, Ford, who started the Ford automobile company, he said, but way back in around 1914, I believe, he said if people actually understood how the monetary system worked, they'd revolt tomorrow. And that's still the case today. But what we're seeing, thanks to the internet, is people are starting to figure out what's going on. You wouldn't have heard 10 or 20 years ago anyone even knowing what the Federal Reserve was. And now we have so many people talking about ending the Fed. So there is awakening happening, and all the ratings of the mainstream media are just collapsing right now. I really just enjoy seeing every month it's just down and down and down. And more people actually get their information from the internet now than mainstream media. And so that's why there's a lot of change happening, because people are starting to hear the truth and starting to realize the real issues, and not just whatever CNBC is saying today about the stock market's up and this is down, but actually hearing the real systemic issues that are going on. And it's definitely changing the world. We're seeing massive changes.
Well, I know we're growing here on USA Watchdog. I'm kind of plugging our show, but I want to move on now to, I'm going to end up with gold, but I want to, because you like both Bitcoin and gold, and I find that kind of unusual. But somebody who has a website called dollarvigilante.com, I would imagine that anything other than the dollar would be something that you would like. But let's talk about Bitcoin. And will you give me your read on? I was shocked when the Treasury came out and said, yeah, Bitcoin's okay, it's okay. And then it went from 400 to, at the time you were interviewing, actually a week ago when I saw you, to 900. I think it's around 900 as of, now, around 900. What is your take on why the Treasury came out and said, Bitcoin's good, okay, it's fine?
Well, I think they actually realized that they can't stop Bitcoin no matter what they do. So instead of trying to stop it, which they can't, you cannot stop Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't exist anywhere. It's totally decentralized. Even if the U.S. government says Bitcoin is illegal, it's banned, Bitcoin still exists, and people will still use it, and they won't be able to even find out if people are using it. That's what a beautiful currency it is. So I think they sort of realized that, and at the same time, I think they also don't really still understand what it is, because if they really did, they would know that this will actually be the end of the fiat currency system and the entire financial and monetary system as we know it, because the entire Bitcoin system is a revolution in money and banking, just the way that the internet was a revolution in communication, and it's going to change everything. And it's once you start using Bitcoin, you'll quickly realize how much better it is than having going to try open a bank account, which often takes hours, if not weeks or months. I've spent months sometimes opening a bank account with all their know your client information that they want to give to the government and things like that. With Bitcoin, you can open an account in 1 second. You can have someone send you money in 1 second. In another second later, you could spend it. It's so much better. And you bring it back to your point about gold and Bitcoin. I really see that the fiat currency system is going to be dying soon. So definitely I like gold for preserving wealth. And I really like Bitcoin for transactions. And I think the more that people can get into using Bitcoin in their day-to-day life, and we're seeing all kinds of companies now starting to accept Bitcoin all over the planet. You can buy flights now with Bitcoin. There's a website you can do that. You can almost do anything with Bitcoin now. And every day there's new companies saying they're accepting it. Virgin Galactic just said they'll accept it for space flights. So that sort of shows you where we're at in our human evolution here. We're accepting Bitcoin for space flights on a private enterprise. So it's very exciting times.
Well, for me, and I look at it. Somebody asked me, would you invest in Bitcoin? And I say, well, for a store of wealth I'm going old school. I'd say no. At trading, I'd say yeah, but you better know what you're doing. And I mean, just like a week ago. And this is what scares me about Bitcoin. When you were on, interviewing with one of the major networks, one of the mainstream media networks, it was about 450. 3 or 4 days later, it's $900. And so the gyrations, the instability. I mean, if I bought it $900 and it ends up being $450, I feel like, woo, I got spanked. How do you justify the volatility of Bitcoin, and is that ever going to smooth out and be consistent?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That is a major issue with Bitcoin. It only started in 2009, so this is just a very early stages of this currency, and a lot of people around the world are just starting to get into it now, and it's going to cause continued volatility for a period of time, although it does have periods where it is more stable. But over time, as more and more people use it, it will become more and more stable. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as an investment. Definitely as a speculation. If you understand Bitcoin and you understand that as more and more people use it, that the price has to go up because it's simple supply and demand, that you can speculate in it. And I've been speculating in it since $3 in 2011. But definitely not as an investment per se, because it is far too early in this currency to make any really rational or conclusive guesses that this is going to become a real currency around the world. But if it does, it could go into the tens of thousands of dollars of Bitcoin and even hundreds of thousands. And I've even done the math. If it actually replaces the US dollar, it will go to around $1 million in today's dollars. Per Bitcoin, just based on the total amount of the U.S. dollars outstanding, which is around $12 trillion. You can't really tell because there's all sorts of ways of calculating this. But if you look at the amount of Bitcoins outstanding, it's 11 million, and you just do the calculator math on that, that works out to about $1 million of Bitcoin if Bitcoin replaces the dollar. That's definitely not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen next year. But who knows, in 3, 5, 10 years, Bitcoin could be a real currency. And if it is, it will go up dramatically.
Well, the Treasury said it was okay to use. So to me, it looks like it's, got the holy water thrown on it from the federal government, from the U.S. Treasury. So, but my other question is, how is it created? My worry is, I don't have it in my pocket. I don't have it in a vault. It has to be stored somewhere. Couldn't you be robbed, with your Bitcoins?
Well, talking about the U.S. Treasury, first of all, I call it the unholy water. If the U.S. Treasury says something's good, I don't like it. But you have an excellent point. Bitcoin is very much like cash. So you could say the same thing about cash. You could lose it. You could lose your wallet. But there's all sorts of new Bitcoin enterprises being started up, and this is something that entrepreneurs should really be paying attention to right now. Just the same way if you were around in 1995 or 94 or 93 with the internet, just getting into almost any internet business would do very well. And I'd say the same thing about Bitcoin right now. We're going to see Bitcoin banks. We're going to see Bitcoin insurance companies. We're going to see all sorts of ways of storing Bitcoin that's more secure. So this is definitely evolving, and you have to be smart. So if you don't know anything about Bitcoin and you're not very technical, we're still in the early stages here, and you have to be quite careful. But if you are a little bit more technical, and a lot of younger people today are, and you know how to back things up or store them in a cloud with passwords and encryption and all that kind of stuff, it is very safe.
I want to come back to you don't put this in your bio, but I know you're a former business owner. You sold your business, and I want people to understand about your vision. That you do have vision. You made millions of dollars selling your business. Tell me a little bit about your business. You sold back in the 2000s, but you started your business back in the 90s. Tell people just a brief story about what you did, and so they get some anchoring to your vision of Bitcoin.
Sure. I guess I seem to be the kind of person who sees trends happening quite early, especially when they're technological, because I really grew up on computers. I was a computer nerd my whole life. So anything technological and now financial, but more technological, I seem to always catch on to a lot of these trends, although not all of them. I didn't expect Twitter to be $1 billion company or anything like that. But I started a company called Stockhouse.com in 1994. I was just working at a bank, and I had been waiting for the internet to get started because I knew it was going to happen. I had just waiting for them to connect all the computers together, and then finally Al Gore did it. I'm just joking about that, obviously. But once I saw that, I just knew I had to get into the business, and I was just interested in the stocks. And so I started Canada's largest financial website. It's very similar to MarketWatch or TheStreet.com in U.S. And still to this day, it's still the top financial website in Canada. My one big mistake was that I didn't sell it or even take it public in time before the tech bubble collapsed. And so that's what put me down this path to where I am today.
But you still made millions of dollars.
I did quite well, yes.
You made millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, but it was worth 240 million at the peak, so it was like 95% lower than what it was.
Okay.
But really, that's what put me down this path, is because I didn't understand why these internet stocks went so high and then they crashed almost zero a few days later, and it put me down the path of starting to understand economics. And I followed Austrian economics, which really explained the tech bubble and explained the housing bubble, and it will explain the coming currency collapse. And so that's really how I've gotten to where I am today. And
then I want to talk to you about gold. And so you study, this is a great dovetail into that, Austrian economics. And there's a lot of people saying, they push gold, was at 1900, now it's, the last couple of years, it's 1240 or 1250 or whatever it is at the moment. There's massive manipulation. I mean, former Assistant Treasury Secretary Paul Craig Roberts says they're manipulating. There's many other pieces of evidence that show, naked short selling of millions of ounces all at one time. Tell people why they should not sell their gold. Some people are saying, maybe I can sell my gold now and buy it back at a cheaper price. And I think that's dangerous, because as you're saying at the beginning of this interview, this can unwind at any moment. I mean, you could wake up and Israel and Saudi Arabia could have launched an attack on Iran. And then I think, what's going to break loose? But why should people hold gold? And should they still continue to hold gold? And where do you think it's going? And how can you allay their fears of people holding gold, even if they bought it at a few $100s higher than it is now?
Yeah, it's a really crazy time. It's really difficult to gauge things in this environment where there's so much money printing. But the case for gold has never been stronger, I don't think, in human history. All that I've seen that has really happened from that fall from 1900 to 1200 was that people bought into the economy's recovering because of all the money printing. But of course, money printing is incredibly bullish for gold, and they've been banks around the world have been printing money at unprecedented levels. The Federal Reserve for the last 5 years has printed more money than in their per year in increases than they ever have in their history, and they have no seeming intention to slow down. They actually really can't if they want to keep the system alive. And so the case for gold has never been better. I like to look back at the last time gold did really well, which was in the 1970s all the way up to 1980. That was a very similar time to today. It was a very inflationary but a stagflationary environment, so the economy wasn't doing well. Inflation was going up, and the only way they could stop it by 1980, stop the inflation from turning into a hyperinflation, was to allow interest rates to rise, and that's what Paul Volcker did. And they actually rose to their natural market level, which turned out to be 18%. If they rose to that level today, and there's so many more problems and systemic issues in the system now, and so much more debt, that I think the interest rate would go naturally to 20, 30, 40%. And that we already talked about, if it even goes to 5 or 10%, it will destroy this entire system as we know it. So this is the end game of this system, and to not own things like gold, to not own hard assets, is very dangerous. I really think in the next few years, and we saw this earlier this year when gold went down dramatically, probably some sort of manipulation, as you were pointing out. It was almost impossible to buy physical gold for cash for about a week. And I think that's going to happen more and more, to the point where you won't be able to buy physical precious metals in the next few years for cash at any price. That's what the system is going to come to. So if you don't own any now and you want to protect your assets, and I really just recommend people buy hard assets. Anything that Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen can't counterfeit is a decent investment, and anything hard. And we recommend precious metals. We also recommend foreign real estate. We started a property in Chile called Gulf Chile, and we're just recommending to people to get a lot of their assets out of the system, because this system is going down.
Jeff Berwick, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this interview. When I said I was looking forward to it in our email exchanges, I really was looking forward to it. Of course, you are the editor of the Dollar Vigilante at dollarvigilante.com. Jeff Berwick coming to us from beautiful Mexico, Acapulco. Thank you very much for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Thank you, Greg.